Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand Brian Schaaf, joined in studio here, meat scientist Diana Clark and chef Tony Biggs. How you guys doing?
Great.
We are fantastic.
Excellent.
We have a great topic today.
I'm super excited. So before we get into this topic, I would like you guys to go on a journey of the mind with me. Okay. And if you were listening to this in your car, right, first I would like you guys to close your eyes. If you're driving, pull over to the side of the road, because this is why we have hazard lights.
But I got a Tesla. It drives itself.
Well, if you have a Tesla, ignore what I just said, right? Right? Now, I would like you to let your mind drift as I read this. There is no cut of beef more majestic or as impressive as a whole prime rib. It is slowly roasted for hours until the exterior is the color of the darkest mahogany and the interior a rosy pink from edge to edge. The meat is supple and lithe, deeply succulent and intensely beefy in flavor. At its best, prime rib embodies all the finest aspects of meat cooking. The heartiness of a stew, the tenderness of a long braise, the bodacious upfront flavors of steak, and the salty and peppery punch of barbecue. Those words, my friends, penned by our pal Nick Solaris. It sounds even cooler if you read it in an English accent. Your mind all of a sudden centered itself, right? It was a bit of like a yoga exercise with meat for the brain.
Can we open our eyes now?
You can open your eyes now.
Okay.
I was worried you fell asleep on us there for a moment. In case you don't know it yet, right? And I say that here in studio, we may not know yet because we record these all ahead of time. But today, when this actually airs, is National Prime Rib Day. Right? Wow. And I usually don't subscribe to, food-based holidays because, I will decide what food I want to celebrate each day, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But today, let's talk a little bit about prime rib, right? Specifically, it's one of those cuts that has been around forever, but like some other cuts, its reputation is kind of waxed and waned, right? So before we get into the story of the prime rib, Dinah, let's talk about what exactly is prime rib. There are some misnomers connected with it, correct?
Yeah, so this is one that actually it can frustrate me at times, to be completely honest, because someone will say, I went to the grocery store and picked out a prime rib. I'm like, was it graded prime, like what USDA prime or certified Angus beef prime? Oh, I don't know. But then how do you know if you got a prime rib? You don't know, okay?
Yeah.
You don't know at that point. So you can have a prime rib is how it's cooked. If you have a prime rib that you're sitting down and eating, it's how it's cooked. Or you actually bought a rib that was graded prime, either USDA prime, certified Angus beef prime, but it has a prime grade on it, meaning it has slightly abundant amount of marbling or more and was 30 months of age or less. If it was USDA prime, it could be B maturity as well, so go higher than that. But needless to say, so there's a rib that can grade prime, or there's prime rib, the traditional cooking method of doing it. But if you're just going to do a rib roast, it's not always, you can't just buy a rib roast and say it's a prime rib. It's until you're cooking it that it becomes that prime rib.
That's right. So just because it may be called a prime rib doesn't necessarily mean it's primed. It could be a select prime rib.
It could be.
Which is very confusing, right? So prime rib, I did a little homework on this, and you probably already know this, but my question was, why is it called a prime rib then, right? And it goes back to it's cooked, it is the rib primal, right?
Yes.
But instead of calling it a primal rib, they called it a prime rib just to
shorten it and make things way more confusing.
Yeah. So if you go to a grocery store, you could find yourself selecting a choice prime rib.
Wow.
Yeah, right. And now we are very confused. But Tony Biggs, you have a culinary career that goes back a few decades, right? So you have seen the rise, the fall, the rise again of the prime rib. So talk to us about this. There was a time, and we may be entering another renaissance of the prime rib right now. But there was a time when this was truly king, correct?
In a lot of places, I feel it still is king. Prime rib, its history dates back thousands of years, and was once really reserved for royalty and winners of ancient duels. Can you do this? Right? Can you imagine? You know, even when I worked for His Majesty and Her Majesty, we would have, when we had a special guest over, we would have a whole prime rib at the table. And this is why we call it Sunday dinner, right? So Sunday dinner in England, Ireland, France, all these great places, culinary inspired. You know, you just have a big roast on a beautiful stainless steel table or metal table, and that's really the star of the show. It's just amazing.
Yes.
It is the mainstay for royalty.
Especially with bone in.
Bone in, exactly. But oh my gosh, I got so many stories of prime rib. You just got me going here. It was just amazing. But really, my grandmother took me to Vegas. You know, I don't know why. She just said, "Okay, you're not going to gamble. You're not going to put any quarters in here." But you know, the marquees of prime rib were all over the town of Vegas. They were bigger than Wayne Newton. They were bigger than Siegfried and Roy. You know, Brian, they have these animals and they do these shows, right? And can you imagine, you know, Sinatra over there in the corner table smoking a cigar going, "Hey, get those two guys a prime rib dinner. You know, they got thick necks like this, you know." And that's what they did in Vegas, right? I mean, so imagine this. In 1997 or 90s, a Big Mac meal was not $4.70 in New York City.
Okay.
You could go to Vegas and get a prime rib dinner with all the trimmings.
insane.
Okay, you're talking 16-ounce prime rib, baked potato, sour cream, bacon bits, chives, all that kind of stuff for $4.95.
Oh my gosh.
Life has changed though now, right? I mean, you're talking like 20 years ago before all the celebrity chefs went there, and now you have it's all a la carte, right?
Yeah.
That's
but
true.
prime rib was the king. It was on a big marquee. Hey, we have prime rib, $10. You know, I mean, can you imagine it bigger than Siegfried and Roy?
That is crazy.
Can you believe this?
Right now, if Siegfried and Roy happen to be listening, you know, we can debate that. You know, we have to leave that open to interpretation.
But not only that is they served prime rib for a buffet.
Yeah.
They served prime rib for steak and eggs. They served prime rib. I mean, you could be broke after a night in Vegas and still muster up $4.95 and get a prime rib dinner.
Even if you had a bad night at the craps table.
Exactly.
Prime rib.
But, you know, I tell you, prime rib has been served in all the hotels and places that I've worked over my career. And I got several stories. I mean, you know, I had a young banquet chef. He's trying to be chef. We're grooming him. You know, he's really energetic. He's got a lot of passion. So this is kind of the first banquet I gave him. I said, okay, we have a special group here, 500. I'm not going to mention the group. Tommy, we've sat down for weeks and we talked about it, how they wanted it cooked, how they want it prepared. So simple. They want it well done. Real simple, right? Simple.
That's
Well
hard,
done.
That's hard to do though, at the same time.
Well, you know, Tommy, I got it, chef. Who are you talking to, right? I got it. 500. I was in meetings all day. I came back because I always played up at night with the fellas, the crew. So we have 3 stations there. I'm going to be on the station. When I get down into the kitchen, I said, "Where are the stations?" He said, "Don't worry, chef. I have everything plated in the hot box." 500 meals in the hot box? 500 meals in a hot box already, and the dinner starts in what, in 2 hours?
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
You know what I did? I put like 1 million sternos in each box to heat it up so hot that it's going to be well done by the time the dinner starts.
Oh my gosh.
I went over. I opened the hot box. I took off the plate lid, and everything was raw. He had put like medium
No way.
to rare pieces of meat with the au jus, hoping it would get up to temperature at that time, right? 500. So, of course, I had a serious anxiety attack, Brian, and Di. So I started taking dinners out, but that time it was like time to serve. So I had to serve some of these meals, and lo and behold, they started coming back down.
Oh
We
my
want it well
gosh.
done. It was a disaster, and I learned something.
500 people.
500. Yeah, that was pretty That was pretty crazy.
Oh, wow.
You know, Chef, you touch on something, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. As you've looked at the migration away from things like prime rib, you could also probably throw things like a steamship round in this, right? These were things served traditionally on buffet styles, feeding a lot of people. Do you think those uses maybe played into the negative reputation that a lot of these big cuts have had over the years? Not necessarily by the high-end places, but if you go to, you know, weddings or places like this, they don't aren't necessarily cooking it the way that would necessarily do it justice.
You know, I've noticed I've noticed culinary these days. So, you know, I when I came back to the States, you know, in early, you know, in 2010, I noticed a huge change in culinary where food around this country especially grew in such different levels. I just feel today that the extern or the graduate or people working at hotels have gotten away from those big cuts of meat like you're mentioning, like the steamship round. And I don't think they just know how to do it.
That's what I think, too.
I just think they don't know how to do it. And so when we have a show like Remember When, which is coming up and maybe in a few weeks or months, you know, we're going to talk about those old cuts, bringing those cuts back, because history repeats itself. The prime rib. I did prime rib for my son's wedding. I said, we're going to have prime rib.
Oh, yeah.
Sliced to order. But now you've got to be able to prepare it well.
Yes.
And so, you know, people over-season it. They put it into a hotter oven than normally. They don't take the right temperature. They don't let the meat rest like we do and preach here at Certified Angus Beef. So it can go down real quick, go down in flames.
And I think so, too. I mean, really, it's a hit or miss to me, if you go to a restaurant and order prime rib. They're either doing it right or they're doing it wrong. And when it's wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah.
So I feel like there is just that fear behind it, and they just don't want to try it because of it.
Yeah, you've got a lot of money invested up front. I mean, this is not a cheap cut. I mean, this is the rib.
Yes.
It's the rib. I mean, and so like when I was in Chicago, somebody invited me to a great restaurant. You all know it. And they have restaurants in L.A. and Dallas and Chicago. Lawry, our friends, Lawry.
Fantastic place.
I mean, really. I started using that Lawry seasoning.
Oh my gosh!
In the 70s. Okay, I love it. And on prime rib, they are the experts in prime rib.
Yeah.
Right. And when I first dined there, I just couldn't believe my eyes. This thing from space rolls up.
Right?
You know, there's a Gary Don. You know, and it's just amazing. It's made out of. It's specially made. I have been trying to find who makes it. There's nobody. You cannot even find out who makes this. So when you have chefs on, please ask them where they get these beautiful Gary Dons. But anyway, they have steam in them. They have like steam cabinets. You can keep your creamed corn, your mashed potatoes, your au jus, and of course you open it up and you can fit a whole prime rib inside of there. It's got a little light, and the chef comes out with his chandelier metal, and he's slicing that prime rib. How thick do you want it, sir? How thick? How thin? You know, you can have an English cut or a king cut, right?
Yes.
And so I was blown away by this just the presence of this Gary Don.
Yeah, it's a throwback, and that's where Lawry's prime rib, amazing, and we're super excited. If you are listening, if you didn't read all the things that are going on in the little disclaimer, we do have coming up here in a couple minutes our pal Nick Solaris and Ryan Wilson, the CEO and chef of Lawry's prime rib, is going to be joining us here to talk about some of those traditions. They're a beast, man. They are historic. They've been around for almost 100 years. And if you want to go to talk about prime rib, who better than to have the Lawry's people come in?
Did you know that in their 80-year history, the Beverly Hills flagship served 10 million pounds of prime rib.
That's insane.
In their 80 years. Okay? Okay, with prime rib, you need sides of dishes.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So this is every month, the L.A. Lawry's, they serve 1,500 pounds of creamed corn.
Gosh.
1,000 pounds of creamed spinach. 1,900 pounds of baked potatoes. That's not with the sour cream. We even got there. And 9,750 pounds of mashed potatoes. Can you imagine that?
Goodness.
Fantastic. You know that, and that sounds like a lot, but we know better. We know that is that's a family gathering in the Biggs household, right?
Yes, and the Clark and the shop household.
Got a wedding coming. Got a wedding coming up. You know what? On that note, let's pick right now to take a break. We will be back in a little bit. Coming up next, our pal Nick Solaris, food writer, photographer, and in case you're wondering how he fits in, just Google his name. He is the man who honestly has a lot of credit due to him for bringing prime rib back into what is en vogue, right? Look him up, Meat Life Media, and of course Ryan Wilson, the CEO and chef behind Lawry's Prime Rib, going to be joining us here next on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the Certified Angus Beef brand. Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the Certified Angus Beef brand, Brian Schaaf joined here via Zoom. Today we are celebrating all things succulent, slow roasted pieces of prime rib because it's National Prime Rib Day. And joining me via Zoom from where I'm at, right in the middle of the country, from about as far west as you can get and about as far east as you can get, two gentlemen who, when I think of prime rib, they are honestly the first two that pop to mind. And how grateful am I that we were able to get them both here at the same time. First, coming to us, our first guest is making his second appearance on the podcast. He's a noted food writer, photographer, TV presenter, and all-around meat expert, even launching his own meat-centric media company in 2018 called Meat Life Media. You've probably caught his work across a variety of YouTube videos from his days hosting Eater's Meat Show or from his photography and writing work with Serious Eats. He's the man who's made it his life's work to bring succulent prime rib back into the fore of mainstream food culture. Please welcome back to the podcast, the John Keats of the culotte, Mr. Nick Solaris. How you doing, sir?
Hello, and thank you for having. Sorry, I thought I was muted there. I do apologize. Let's do that again. Hello, thank you so much for having me. Happy Prime Rib Day, everyone.
This is like
absolutely.
This is like Christmas. It's a beautiful thing. Excellent. Our next guest is the great-grandson of the man who founded restaurant bastion Lawry's Prime Rib. We're talking like serious prime rib royalty here. A chef by trade who's worked in some of the best-known kitchens around the world, including Michelin-starred Quince in San Francisco, La Toque in Napa, and Gramercy Tavern in New York City. He returned to his iconic family restaurant group started by his great-grandfather in the early 1900s and was recently named its chief executive officer in 2020. With domestic locations in Beverly Hills, Dallas, and Las Vegas, as well as international locations across Asia and a bevy of other concepts underneath his domestic umbrella, please welcome to the podcast, Chef and Chief Ryan Wilson. How you doing, sir?
Fantastic. Thank you all. Great to be here. Great to talk about something as delicious and as special to many people as prime rib.
Oh,
Fantastic.
There was a piece that I read, and it was so eloquent. It actually brought a tear to my eye. And when I looked at who wrote it, it was, of course, penned by Mr. Solaris from 2014, an Eater article called In Defense of Prime Rib. Before we get into that, Nick, I'll go ahead and throw it to you first. Talk us through, because you are a walking prime rib dictionary. Talk to us about the history of the prime rib. You once said all prime rib is roast beef, but not all roast beef is prime rib.
Well, that's actually correct. It's also more correct that I am literally walking prime rib, considering it's probably, I would say at least 25% of my body mass and probably about 92% of my fat mass is prime rib.
Impressed.
Yeah. So what prime rib is in the modern world is not really what it is if you think about it classically. And classically, a prime rib was a center cut roast of beef, the center ribs, right? So really, if you're looking at it, it looks almost like a New York strip because there's no spinalis, right? They're taking that out. Now, thankfully, what we consider prime rib in the current day is basically the whole rib primal, slow roasted. So then you're getting like the 7th and the 8th bones, which have that lovely cap on them. But I think if you look at what prime rib is, to me, it is, I think a steak is the most elemental form of meat cooking. But I think that once we developed a way to completely surround a piece of meat with heat and to retain it, that's when roasting came in. And I think that, to me, it's the most civilized way to cook a piece of beef. I mean, sure, you can put it in a plastic bag and dunk it in water and you'll get some effect. And, but to me, like slow roasting a piece of prime rib, it's such a commitment to the oven space, to the time, to the money that you've spent on it. I mean, it really is. And I would eat prime rib every day of the week if I could. It is meant to be a special feast, right? But coming from England, the Sunday roast was kind of the most important meal of the week. And that is often roast beef, not always prime rib. It might be, a silver side or rump roast or a different cut of beef, but a large joint of meat cooked in the oven. And the origins of that are on Sunday. The whole village would get together. They would get their joints of lamb or mutton or beef or whatever it was. They put them in pots, take them down to the local baker who was not baking during the week, but would keep the ovens going on weekends. Everybody would put their roasts and joints in the oven. They would cook while people went to church. And then you'd come out, you'd take your roast back home and you'd have your Sunday feast. And Thanksgiving to me is like often what a lot of Sunday dinners look like in England every week, because you'll have like lamb with stuffing and mint jelly and like 2 different types of potatoes and parsnips and turnips and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and this whole array of, it is a celebratory food. It's Sunday, it's Lord's Day. You eat, the best food. And to me, prime rib is very much an extension of that tradition, but brought into America, it just has become something that you can really do like any day of the week. I mean, that's the beauty of it. And I'll say this much, there's a reason that when you go to a restaurant, especially a steakhouse in the States, and you get the quote unquote English cut, it's 3 thin slivers of beef. And then you get like what's considered the American cut. And it's like 32 ounces with a whole bone, and it's like
Cadillac.
It's like everything else. America has taken civilized, restrained traditions and just made them like way better, like just blowing it up. Like, I'll give you an example. When I moved here, I was a teenager. I moved here when I was like 15, and I went to Katz's Deli, and Katz's Deli serves you about a 3.5 pound sandwich. So when I went back to England, my mom was like, "Oh, there's some pastrami in the fridge." So I made myself a sandwich. She was like, she looked at me, she was like, "That's for everyone." So you look at like, you'll see a prime rib and you show it to an English person, they're like, "That's like the whole roast, right?" Like, no, that's just one bone.
Well, historically speaking, I would suggest that what you just described is exactly why we beat the redcoats in the Revolutionary War. It all makes sense now.
It's also a reason I decided to emigrate here. I was like, wait, what are we doing here? Do you want sheets of paper or do you want the whole ream? It's so, and I think, but getting into the American tradition, I mean, beef, we don't have to tell you guys, beef is king in America, right? Beef is large. It is the most celebratory. It is the one protein that is so tied to the American legend, right? You think about cowboys, you think about the stockyards, you think about this interstate commerce system. Some of it it's based on these trails where the beef used to go from the Midwest and from where you guys are over to where I am and over to where Ryan is, right? So, and to me, prime rib it's a commitment. It's a commitment not just for if you're doing it at home, but it's a commitment on a restaurant's part, right? Yep. Because you can sell a really nice piece of roast beef one night or lose money on a roast beef sandwich the next, right? Or roast beef hash or whatever you do. So, to me, it's always, and coming here in the 80s, and it was still a pretty big tradition there. And you would see roast beef carts like they have at Lawry's. And, at that time, my favorite restaurant, Smith & Wollensky, would do like 8 or 9 ribs a night, and that really lost, it lost currency. And I think a lot of it was that people started worrying about, there was the whole lean 90s with the California cuisine. I'm not holding that against you, Ryan.
Oh, no.
And all the vegetables, right? People were like eating leaner foods, and prime rib sort of fell out of favor. And it got to the point where like Smith & Wollensky was only doing like 1 or 2 ribs a night. And I always found it to be like the best reason to go. Any idiot can cook a steak. Let's be honest. It's the simplest thing to do, right? But cooking prime rib, that is real cooking, right? And it's like, as I said, you're putting in, at the restaurant level, even then it's an expensive joint of meat. You're putting that in the oven. And if anything goes wrong with that, you've essentially ruined that whole piece of beef.
Yes.
So anyway, my love for prime rib is the whole basis for my career. I mean, I wouldn't write about food if it wasn't for prime rib. And I've been to Lawry's many times, especially the one in Chicago, which was it's so sad that it's gone, but it was such a magnificent room. But a huge fan of Lawry's. And what I see in Lawry's is very much the strongest link to the English tradition of eating roast beef or prime rib, Yorkshire pudding, the au jus, the gravy, the sides, the hospitality, the regal nature of everything, the dining room, the wood paneling, it's such a magnificent experience. And it's also at the same time so American. Yeah. It really is a uniquely American experience. So anyway, I love prime rib, as you may have just heard.
Well, it's funny. We talk about the history of prime rib, and it's really, you can't really go down that history without dedicating a significant portion of that discussion to Lawry's. Looking at Lawry's and its history, I mean, it's a rabbit hole between where it would have started with Ryan's great grandfather or great grandfather, Lawrence. Who he and his brother-in-law opened a restaurant that's still in existence called Tam O'Shanter, and a few years later they opened Lawry's. I mean, can you tell us from your perspective, give us that history of Lawry's, because there is so much to absorb.
Absolutely. So the history actually begins back in 1915 in downtown Los Angeles, when Lawrence Frank and cousins, the Vandekamps, opened up a potato chip stand on Flower Street in downtown Los Angeles. And they sold what they called the Saratoga chip. And they had, I think it was some brilliant marketing, but their idea was that this is a healthy potato chip. It was something that they say was sold at the Saratoga Springs spas up in New York. And they brought it to Los Angeles. And we have some amazing old photographs of them selling these potato chips out of this little storefront. That business ultimately became Vandekamp's Bakery, which through the 30s through 50s was a major operation up and down the West Coast, both with kind of brick and mortar coffee shop bakery stands. Also, they had a retail outlet in grocery stores. It was a big business. And yet alongside that, my great grandfather Lawrence loved restaurants, loved theater. He actually had some time being a vaudevillian performer. I mean, he was a character, never graduated past junior high school. He was one of those incredible characters of that era. And in 1922, opened up the Tam O'Shanter. Originally, it was called Montgomery's Country Inn. Still standing today on what we know today as Los Feliz Boulevard in Los Angeles. And that was a kind of neighborhood coffee shop. It also served as the kind of commissary for the bakery facility, which was a couple miles away. He then in 1938 finally decided to open a restaurant entirely based around what he thought was the greatest meal in America, the standing ribs of beef, something that we think he served fairly often on Sunday with his family. It was the typical idea, as Nick just said, of bringing the family together on a Sunday roast. They would cook a joint of beef, and my great grandfather loved tinkering around in the kitchen, loved bringing his family together, loved the ceremony of all of it, and loved prime rib. And initially, he was stubbornly focused on opening a restaurant. This was his second restaurant, around one entree. He just wanted prime rib as the only thing you could get in the restaurant. And he had many friends advised him otherwise. And so he actually opened the restaurant with a full menu. A full menu for 1938 standards, right? So it had broiled pineapple on it. It had a side of cottage cheese and I think lamb chops for 35 cents or something amazing. And that lasted all of about 6 months, where he said, nope, I'm leaving behind the full menu and we're going to go 100% to prime rib. And prime rib with our spinning bowl salad and our side dishes and the Yorkshire pudding and the full meal as we know it today. And that menu and its focus really on prime rib really stayed true until the mid 80s, when we started offering some fish dishes and a couple other items. Go ahead. Yeah, I remember, my great grandfather Lawrence was so stubborn on this limited menu that my uncle always tells the story. He came into the company in the early 80s, and he advised management at the time to add sour cream to being available for our baked potatoes. At the time, my great grandfather said, absolutely not, no sour cream. That's a terrible thing to put on a potato. I won't allow it. And people were bringing sour cream into the restaurant to put on their own potatoes. And I think it was an early management victory of my uncles to say, let's just bring the sour cream in, please. So anyways, Lawry's the prime rib, opened 1938. That was is our flagship. It's actually on the same piece of real estate as when it was opened. We operated across the street from about 1946 until 1992, and then moved over to where we are today. It's been an amazing run, and we opened up the second location in Chicago in 1974. My great grandfather Lawrence always wanted Lawry's to be a unique experience, only one location. And my grandfather, Richard Nathan Frank, he saw there to be an opportunity in growing the Lawry's experience. And he always had an argument with my great grandfather saying, you're not going to open up a second one. And yes, I am. And he ultimately ended with over my dead body. And my grandfather signed the LOI in Chicago 6 months after his father passed away. So he waited, he was respectful, and then opened up Chicago in 1974. Then we opened in Dallas, and then Las Vegas, and some international stores after that. So it's a very proud tradition, and something we are really excited about maintaining today. I think the last 12 months has been an amazing moment for our country and certainly for our industry. And in the last month, as we fortunately have been able to start opening our restaurants back up in California, the goodwill that we have created and maintained over many generations of dining, I think really speaks to our commitment to hospitality, and adding on to what Nick was saying, our commitment to prime rib. And to me, it is so much more than a piece of meat. It is so much more than that delicious and really spectacular anatomy of the animal. But it's about all the ceremony and all the traditions that families have created for generations, centered around bringing this big joint of beef in and either taking the time to take care of it and make that investment in time and dollars and nurture it in your oven, whether it's in a restaurant or otherwise. And there's so much richness, and I use that word with its dual meanings, to the prime rib experience. So
it's amazing. One of the things, and it seems like especially over the past year, there's always this kind of longing to be able to go back. Certainly in the industry, especially, I would imagine. But, it's one of the things that I love about places like Lawry's, places like Tropical Acres in Florida, these restaurants that have withstood the test of time, is it always seems like no matter what else is going on in the world, you guys are like the great timekeepers of the world. Like everything, it's not that they don't change, but it's that they still maintain that nostalgic feel that makes the dining experience so special. As somebody, as fourth generation at the helm of this, how much weight do you have to put into how much do we really want to tweak this institution going forward, and the pressures that come along with that?
Sure, it's a really good question, and we can talk at length about it. I think and I've been with the company since 2008, and I've run a number of our restaurants, repositioned a number of our restaurants, had some successes and had some failures. I definitely stubbed my toe on a couple of them. And I think the strategic philosophical idea behind it is that I need to maintain that tradition. I need to maintain the emotional connection that people have with coming to Lawry's. And there are so many little details that people consider when they come into our restaurants, and it's about so many little details, and it's always a question of whether you're going to pull that last brick out or change things to change the wall, so to speak. And so it's maintaining some of that emotional connection, but also giving people options of doing something different if they want to. And to me, there's something different about, making change and making the same thing. They're not mutually exclusive in the end. I think we need to make sure that we're always committed to an exceptional dining experience and food quality and the hospitality and the condition of our spaces. But we also need to be able to give guests, those that want to have something different, a couple different options. And, as we've moved the menu forward a little bit, we have always and we will always keep the classic Lawry's experience core and unchanged. We have so many guests that come in and that never open the menu. They know exactly what they want. They want the same pace. They want their same server. They want their martini. Then they don't even open the menu. And that will always be sacred. I want the guests to come in and be able to have that great tableside Lawry's experience with no change. But then also for those that want to come in and have some of our fantastic, certified Angus beef prime steaks, we've got some really good other items on there. We've developed some fantastic seafood items. We actually have a little bit of seasonality on the menu, but those are options for people that want something different. But if you want something 100% the same and the same as when your grandfather brought you to the restaurant in the 60s, absolutely, we got that for you. So
I'll say, Nick, I just saw your Instagram story before we went live here with your celebratory reservation at Smith and Walensky's. I assume you already probably know who your server is going to be when you go in?
Oh yeah, and they're already holding the prime rib for me. They actually pull mine out a little early because I like it extra rare.
They know. So Nick, talk to me about, we talk about the institutions, the places like the Lawry's, the places that have maintained this excellence over the decades. But while Lawry's was doing their thing, the reputation of prime rib kind of waxed and waned. And when I think about it, a kid in the 80s, when I grew up thinking about prime rib, of course, I'm thinking about buffets. You read a lot about the $5.99 prime rib, buffet on the strip in Vegas, things like that. What are the different factors that would have gone into the reputation kind of suffering through the 80s and maybe some of the 90s?
Well, certainly what you're mentioning is that a lot of people's first exposure to prime rib, because it had really disappeared from average restaurant menus, is that it was a heat lamp induced desiccation of like some gray stuff that they carved, and there's like splinters and shards of beef like flying everywhere at a wedding or a buffet somewhere, right? Yeah. It's just not, look, it doesn't actually, prime rib itself is fairly robust in as long as you're maintaining its temperature and its moisture correctly, you can cut that stuff around all night, as you see at Lawry's. Everything they cut off that, even the well done stuff, is succulent, right? But storing it like horizontally on a heat lamp, not carving correctly, all of those things has just done things to its reputation that didn't help it. But at the same time, look, there was a huge shift away from red meats. There was the other white meat and chicken and more chicken, right? So all the way from like the late 80s into the 90s and well into like the mid-aughts, there was a genuine revulsion for fat. And then we had the Atkins revolution, which for all of its, for whatever, it's a ludicrous diet, because you can't have Yorkshire pudding. What's the point, right? But the fact is, it got people back into eating fatty meat, and we began to realize, like, hey, maybe it's actually the sugar that we're consuming in mass quantities and not all this fat that's actually bad for us. So, we started seeing a resurgence in hamburgers and steaks, right? And I've just always been an advocate for prime rib. To me, it's the finest example of cooking meat, and you get so many different aspects to it. So you get that salty beefiness of a steak, right? You get that nice exterior crunch, but then the inside is as tender as barbecue or a braised meat or a stew. It's the flavor, to me, is the most complex of any way of cooking meat. You've coddled that eye so much, right? You've tenderized it over time. You're maximizing those internal flavors. It's like nothing else. And quite honestly, I don't even know if my favorite thing may be the very next day, very, very thin slices of cold roast beef on white bread with Coleman's mustard I might even prefer that to eat. That might be my death row meal. I want the prime rib the night before I get executed, and then have that as a death row meal. But
I haven't tried that. That sounds like a spectacular flavor profile.
You should actually make those to go at the end. Like they give you a box of like sandwiches. But then we saw that there has been a reappraisal of prime rib, as there has been of many dishes and many of the way that we used to eat at the turn of the 19th century versus the 20th century. So you're seeing things like, oyster dishes and like, crab imperial and all these like things that you thought was sort of so out of vogue, and they're sort of coming back, and there's a resurgence and people like, there was the big restaurant that opened here a few years ago was for Charles Prime Rib. Right, which is a prime rib restaurant, and it was the hottest thing in town, and you couldn't believe that it was like people wanted to go there more than a sushi restaurant or like the latest macrobiotic, like organic, plant forward pizza place. So I think there's been a serious redemption of prime rib at the sort of the more high end restaurant level, and a lot of people will be doing it as specials on Sundays and stuff. But look, there's people like Smith & Wollensky who's always served prime rib. Obviously, Lawry's, their whole business has been based on prime rib. And I think that in those cases, they were almost immune to the fits of trends and the whims of the public, because institutions like that, House of Prime Rib in San Francisco, they really do represent. It's not just that they're doing something perfectly over and over again, right? It's that people have genuine, profound memories and experiences that happen in those places, and that's way beyond food. It has nothing to do with food. It's those are places you go to these institutions to celebrate. And what I love about when you go to Lawry's on any given day, it's like sometimes there's like weddings and anniversaries, and there's like a 95-year-old and there's a 5-year-old, and they're both celebrating birthdays, right? It's just the panoply of human, but it's always joyous, right? It's like the celebration is like, Lawry's, more than any other restaurant, even more than like your average steakhouse, it's like, it's always a celebration. That meal is always a celebration. And that's what I love about it.
Excellent. Well said.
Yeah, brilliantly said.
All right, Ryan, I got to ask this question because I would be remiss, and Chef Tony has knives. So I've got to. So Chef Tony, if you have never met him, Chef Tony Biggs is our director of culinary arts. He's also a co-host on this podcast. Mm-hmm. One of the great
and apparently an editor.
That's right. One of the great mysteries of Chef Tony has not been able to unravel is the carts that you guys serve. Tell us about these carts. He has searched eBay, he has searched high and low. He wants a Lawry's cart, but
they're custom made.
Yes, they're custom made.
Yes,
they cost. What do they cost? They're like $100,000 each or something insane, right?
No, half that right now to make one. But still, I mean, it's an expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah, but if you want, if CAB wants one, it'll be 100,000.
Yeah. We'll take it in prime rib.
You can make it.
Yeah, the history of the cart. I mean, I think you remember the first cart was made back in the 30s, and at that time, quote unquote, technology allowed for craftsmen to bend that steel and to make those carts, and it was always a foundational piece of the experience that my great grandfather wanted to do it tableside. He was inspired by, but actually never visited, couple of restaurants in London, one Simpsons on the Strand and Wilton's, both of whom who do tableside service well off of Gary Don's. And he took that premise in the 30s and designed this incredible kind of Art Deco styled cart. He had a couple different manufacturers in Southern California. In part, we think they were in Southern California because at the time, there was a lot of aircraft manufacturing being done here. And that same technology of bending that steel was what went into making aircraft cowlings, the surroundings of the engine back in World War II era aircraft. And fast forward to today, I guess it was probably 3 years ago, we went through an exhaustive multi-year search to try and find anyone who had that technology to be able to do that. And we've identified a company in Arizona that can continue to do it, but you basically have to make a concrete mold, and then you have another device that presses and shapes and bends the steel around it. But there's about a 30% failure rate to bending that steel to make sure it comes out properly to get those domes built and structured as they should. The carts themselves are actually filled with water in the kind of late morning every day. And then we charge that water basin up to about 190 degrees to keep all of our side dishes and the meat itself warm, kind of in an ambient temperature. And then the carts, go out on the floor, and we monitor the temperature in the water and then on the side dishes throughout the evening. And they work incredibly well. Up into the late 90s, the carts actually were heated with coal. And so our restaurants used to have coal rooms, which, I mean, I grew up in Northern California and would only come visit the restaurants maybe once or twice a year as a little kid. But I remember seeing an inferno in these coal rooms that was terrifying. And now they've been converted into linen rooms. But to think that, until fairly recently, we used to have these trays of hot coal that would slide in underneath the water basin to keep the water warm. And from a variety of reasons, obviously, we had to pull that out. If nothing else, can't have that much carbon monoxide moving through a dining room. So, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I saw Barb. So the carts from the Chicago location, we have to ask Tony, write this down. So were you able to reuse those, ship them to some other locations?
Yeah, so they are currently, your ears must have been burning. We actually just had a management call this morning, and we were talking about it. All those carts are currently in Las Vegas, and they're there because the manufacturer and then the refurbisher is based in Vegas. So we're going to take those Chicago carts, basically strip them down, rebuild them, and have them ready to go back into service in our restaurants and be ready to go back into service in future Lawry's locations, both in the States and overseas. So
excellent. Be on the lookout, because I am envisioning Chef Tony Biggs pulling off an Ocean's 11 type heist in the near future. So
they weigh about 500 pounds. So be sure to do your stretches before you want to try and move too quickly.
Outstanding. So before we wrap, and I really appreciate you guys taking time, especially, I mean, in all the busyness that's going on, especially, full disclosure, today is not Prime Rib Day that we're recording this, but it will air on National Prime Rib Day. But
yeah, we're getting ready for it.
That's right. We'll pretend that it is, right? But before we go, I wanted to get your opinions on, and Ryan, a video on YouTube that I watched of you was what really tipped me off. Was you talked about slicing prime rib and the correct way to do it, wrong ways to do it, and it set my mind down. Between the two of you, when you see prime rib, what are some of the biggest missteps that you see happening, either in how it's prepared, how it's sliced, served with the wrong, au jus or a horseradish cream, or however you want to go?
So for the home cook out there, I would say, the number one piece of advice is give yourself ample time. And by that, I mean not hours, but days to plan and prepare for this feast. It makes the experience, I think, that much more special. And it gives you more opportunity to enjoy it, and it does justice to the piece of meat. So in the restaurant, it's about almost a 3-day process between seasoning overnight. We believe in a very long, low, slow cook time. So anywhere from 3.5 to 4 hours at a low temperature. And then I want almost that same amount of rest time for the restaurants. At minimum an hour to let that cooked piece of meat relax and all the juices to settle. But I think that's critical. When you're picking your meat, get as good a quality as you can afford. Certified Angus beef is something we really believe in because it delivers a great, consistent experience for our guests. But also try and find something with a good amount of age on it. We don't serve anything under 30 days. And for National Prime Rib Day, we're going to be doing a promotion with some dry-aged prime rib where we do some wet portion and then we move into a dry aging to get it up to 45 days of age. But again, it's about that time. It's taking your time, and it's not rushing that piece of meat, because it is truly something special.
Outstanding. Nick, your thoughts?
On prime rib day.
on places where you see things going wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. Is that time is the most important thing when it comes to aging meat, when it comes time to cooking meat, and when it comes time to resting meat. And I think that the most, people ask me like, how long should I cook for something? Well, the answer is you should cook until it's ready. And the way you know that is through a thermometer, because that's the ultimate test of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want your meat to be 135 degrees, right? I don't know what your oven is like. I don't know how dense or how much fat is in that chop, but I can tell you this much. If you cook it to 125 and let it rest, the internal temperature will come up to 135 degrees by the time it comes to slice that joint. And I think I'm a huge proponent of dry aging, but funnily enough, I don't think it's actually as necessary for prime rib, because prime rib, it has its own aging process. You are slowly roasting that meat to develop textures and flavors that you can't get in any other way. There's no way to rush that. You can't sous vide it. It's something about the moisture, the allowing things to escape from the meat. You're driving out moisture, but you're concentrating flavor. So I think that what I do is even if it's fresh, in other words, wet aged beef, I will actually let that sit out in my fridge for 3 or 4 days, and I'll season it maybe for a really thick joint, maybe a day or two ahead of time. I did notice a really interesting thing on the Lawry's. So I got the Lawry's home kit, which I should interject. And it's very interesting that they say don't actually season the sides of the joint, just all the way around. I was like, that kind of makes sense, because you're doing it enough that it's going to penetrate the cap. It's going to penetrate the fat layer. You want it to work its way through. But on the outside, you kind of don't want that three-dimensional input, because you're almost going to taint the eye almost. That was my feeling. I was like, that's a really good way to do it, especially if you're not doing a whole roast. If you're not doing every bone, if you're doing like 3 or 4 bones. So what I like to do is leave it in the fridge uncovered. You're allowing moisture to escape. It's not true dry aging, because you're not really developing flavors. There's not much of an enzymatic process happening in that short of a time period, but you are priming that surface to get a better sear. And what I do is I do the reverse sear. So I'll do it that way. I'll season it a day ahead or two, put it back in the fridge, let that seasoning penetrate. It's a very thick chop. You want the Lawry seasoning, the salt, the pepper, whatever you're using. Then I put it in the lowest oven temperature that I have wherever I am. If I'm in a really good kitchen, it might be like 150 degrees. But, I think most residential ovens in a place like New York City, which is gas, we have a lot of gas here. I think it's, it's about 175. Mm-hmm. I just put it in there for low and slow. The old cliche, it's there for a reason. If it can break down, tough pork butts with all those interconnected tissues, it's going to do wonders for a piece of prime rib that has essentially 3 muscles, which are all fatty and delicious on their own, right? But then it's really about letting it reach that internal temperature that you want. I happen to like it at about 125 degrees. So I'll bring it to 115. I'll pull it out and I'll wrap it, and I'll just let it sit off to the side of the oven for like, what I'm really looking for is actually, so when I put my hand on it, it's still warm, but it's not like hot. So it might be like an hour or two. Mm-hmm. And then I crank the oven to 500 degrees. I make my Yorkshire puddings, pull them out, and then I put the thing in. It can take about 5 minutes at that temperature. It just sears the outside. And to me, there's just no better way to prepare that piece of beef. There's no better thing to eat on earth. And if you can pull off a really good prime rib, like, that is the way to impress a crowd. You can sit there and flambe stuff and do souffles and all of this stuff, and it's like nothing is going to impress people like a prime rib with Yorkshire pudding.
Well said. Well said, guys. Before we turn you loose, Ryan, can you give us some plugs? What's happening with Lawry's? You just mentioned the Lawry's at Home project that's going on, but can you tell us what's going on, and tell us where people can find you guys on social as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I can. So a couple things for National Prime Rib Day. If you're near one of our restaurants, come on in. We're doing a dry age special, so you can come in and get our traditional wet age prime rib. We also have some fantastic dried age certified Angus beef on the carts. So that's one. And two, we've just launched back in December. We launched Lawry's at Home, which is an e-commerce offering where you can order through our website and have shipped to you via FedEx the classic Lawry's experience. The meals come in 3 different portions: a third of a full roast, a half of a full roast, and then the full 7-bone roast that we serve in the restaurants. Exact same meat as what we sell in the restaurants. And the kit, as we call them, come with all of the accompanying side dishes ready to go in your home kitchen. It's a fantastic experience, great way to bring people together, great gift option also with Mother's Day and Father's Day coming up. I'm actually in another month coming out to spend some time with the great people at Certified Angus Beef to work on some outdoor cooking options for prime rib. So with summertime coming up, get your big green eggs, your Traeger grills, your Weber's fired up, and play around with some slow and low prime rib cooking outside. It goes great with a nice cold beer on the lawn. So come enjoy our restaurants. We certainly really appreciate all the support. It's been an incredible year for us, and we're still out there delivering a great dining experience for all of our guests in Beverly Hills, Dallas, and Las Vegas. So thank you all. And thanks for the time.
I think I just heard Nick booking his flight for the wet aged, dry aged in the car.
I was drooling also.
I think the other thing there, it's a really fun opportunity to get a portion of each and do a little bit of side-by-side flavor profile. I think as Nick said, dry aging, I think, is critical for steaks. It's a little different for prime rib. And I think there's a good option for people to try side-by-side. So
I actually find that I like my steaks aged 35 to 45 days. That's way too long for prime rib. I think like a 21-day age is perfect, because remember that when you're slow roasting something like that, you are basically moving that flavor all the way through the meat. So you don't, you want to taste, it's going to taste like beef on the inside.
Yeah.
When you cook a steak, that funk is on the outside, but the inside is still going to be, it's still going to taste like a piece of beef. And with prime rib, with the super aged stuff, the whole piece of meat becomes the same flavor. It's monosyllabic. You don't really want that. You want that nuance. You want those flavor differences.
And I think when you push the age that far out, also, it's lost a lot of moisture, and the mouthfeel is not the same either, which to me is one of the critical pieces of enjoying a good prime rib. It's all the different textures you get. So
yeah, very much so. It's less important on a steak because you're cooking it so quickly, but over slow cooking something and really rendering it down like that, you will lose a bit of that tensile suppleness.
Cool. I'm glad I work in a restaurant. I can just go downstairs and have a cold prime rib sandwich with some Coleman's mustard.
You can make this happen real quick.
The best bread is Japanese milk bread.
I had a great katsu sandwich yesterday, and I think I'm gonna have to go have a little bit more. So
it's beautiful.
I'm hungry now. Well, by the time that this is airing, because obviously we're busy on Prime Rib Day, so we had to do this before, I will be eating and walking you guys through how I prepared my Lawry's at Home feast. Because I have a large chop of CAB rib that's in my fridge right now. It's uncovered. I'm aging it. I'm actually going to age it quite a bit of time, and I'm going to I'm going to season that with the Lawry's a couple of days before. And then I'm thinking, actually, I'm going to bust out the sous vide machine, not for the roast, which I'm going to cook in the oven the way that I just described, but I think I'm going to sous vide all of the other sides because it comes perfectly sealed. I'm sure it's seasoned ahead of time.
They're ready to go onto the table.
It is such a soup. Let me just give a hats off to whoever did the packaging on it. It is so superb. It comes with a kit. It comes with a thermometer. It comes with the Lawry's seasoning salt. It comes with the salad dressing. I have to figure out how I'm going to get the bowl to spin, but that's my problem. I love it. It's the only salad I'll eat. But then it comes with all of the sides, the cream spinach, the corn, the mashed potatoes, the au jus, the gravy, the Yorkshire pudding batter, all in these perfectly flattened, vacuum sealed packets. It's so perfectly done. So yeah, I can't wait to walk everyone through it. And so listen to this podcast and then go and watch and drool and get yourself a Lawry's at home kit.
Fantastic.
Well said. On that note, we are going to let these gentlemen return to their regularly scheduled lives as we go. I do invite you, though, go back to season 1, look up the episode called Meat Life Media. You can catch everything you wanted to know about Nick Solaris, his story, and of course his fantastic media production company. So we are going to turn it back. Chef Tony and Diana Clark are going to join us back here in studio. But before we roll, Ryan Wilson, CEO, chef of Lawry's Prime Rib, 4th generation in the family. Thank you so much. Nick Solaris, Meat Life Media. Guys, thank you so much for celebrating with us here on National Prime Rib Day on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand. Back here on the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the certified Angus beef brand, Brian Schaaf, meat scientist, Diana Clark, Chef Tony Biggs. Guys, we're talking prime rib today. And, you know, when you think about prime rib, when you think about beef fabrication, right? Who was it? Cat Stevens, who originally penned the phrase, the first cut is the deepest, right? The first cut when you are fabricating a side of beef, guess what? It's exposing the rib. The first cut truly is telling us how much quality is in that carcass, right? It is it's the mothership of all beef cuts.
Oh, yeah.
The rib primal. We're talking about that today. First, let's get into the science here, right? 7 bones?
Yep, 7 bones traditionally. Sometimes you can find more, but yeah,
Right.
7.
If you're in areas of large nuclear fallout,
Yes.
you might have a few more in there, but roughly 20 to 30 pounds is what we're talking.
Yeah,
Ish?
yeah. You could get, and you usually see they have their average split. So you have your heavies and your lights. Your lights are going to be like 14-ish and down 14, 15. And then you can have up 16, 20 pounds. Yeah, that'd be your heavies.
Excellent. Okay. So as we talk about this, and I'm going to tell you my own personal experience here, Chef, is one of the reasons that I stopped getting prime rib, or maybe was never that excited about it. And after chatting with Nick, honestly, about a year ago, his take on prime rib, it sort of reinvigorated me to try it again. But it is the idea of when I eat steak, when I eat beef, I like that textural difference, right, between soft and a crispy exterior, right? That Maillard reaction, which the difference between a rib steak and prime rib is there's not as much of that surface area that goes in there, right? Mm-hmm. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about the differences between a rib steak. Let's talk about the difference between that and a prime rib, as you would see, Chef.
You know, you mentioned that, that crust. You mentioned that crust. So, I don't know if you younger viewers have seen this this cut, the 109 netted rib. Yeah. Okay, 109. It's netted, and there is a fat cap. The fat cap, we're not talking about the spinalis now. We're talking about the fat cap is not removed. So when they do fabricate it, it is removed. Then it is placed back on.
Yeah. Okay.
They actually, in some portions of the world, they actually take the bone off the rib, and they put it back on, and that's called cradling the prime rib. And so they would, after all that's been done with the fat cap back on, they net it, and then we would season it as chefs. We would season it, right, and get it all crusty for Brian, right, and then roast it off beautifully medium rare. And when it came out, we'd untie it. But during the cooking process, the string on the prime rib gets really tight, right, and when you cut it, all that rosemary, black pepper, salt. I had a nice white jacket, and now I'm covered in spices.
Every time.
This is why you don't have that anymore. No, I'm not kidding. Okay, right?
that actually sounds like me with my belt after Thanksgiving. So.
But this is kind of like what Prudhomme did, who really became famous for this Cajun prime rib. He took that fat cap off, and he put seasoned onions with his his Creole seasoning or his New Orleans style seasoning, put the fat cap back on, tied it up, roasted it for 45 minutes at 500 degrees. I mean, really, really charred for like 45 minutes to an hour. He put it back in the refrigerator overnight. Okay, let it calm down. It's not cooked, because we all know a rib takes 3 to 4 hours, depending on how you like it, right? The next day, he would cut rib chops out of it, taking those onions off, put his blackened seasoning on, and then put it blacken those ribeye steaks like you're talking
Yeah.
It's
about.
like the best of both worlds for you. You know, it's got the rib roast and then the extra char from the grilling.
Yeah, so it is. It's a bit of a hybrid between a prime rib and a rib steak.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, he really nailed it. I don't know if that was his intention, but he did discover something that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd say
that was
that'd be
cool.
pretty awesome.
Yeah, I
And
know.
we're going to make that, actually. I've got one where they're going to do in about 5 or 6 days.
Glorious. Call me when it
might
goes
be all
down.
I'm going to call you.
Sorry.
Excellent.
call you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk about that one more time, just for a little clarity. You talk about the 109, right? That's your NAMP guide
Yeah,
number.
your NAMI, yeah, they just have, so you have different numbers for all your cuts. So if you ever want to know exactly what you're getting, you could actually reference it by number. You could have a 109, you have a 112A. So you have your 109 traditionally. You can actually have, so you have this, they call it a rib cap, which has a cap and wedge meat. So it's your rib lifter meat, and then there's another, your multifidus muscle and trapezius muscle, if you want to look it up to be specific. But what they used to do is actually come and peel that rib cap off and take those muscles out, and then they'd put the fat back on and tie it. And I'm fairly certain the main reason why they put the fat back on is because they used to have the grade of the rib on there. So if it was USDA Choice, USDA Prime, USDA Select, that stamp would be rolled on the carcass. So that way, if a chef is purchasing it, he then sees, yes, I did get what I'm ordering. I got my USDA Prime on there. Well, now we have those vacuum package bags. It's all on the bag. So that's why they really don't worry about that. You don't pay for that extra fat. You just get your traditional 112A would be your boneless 2-inch, your 2x2 lip on the rib. But it all does serve its purpose, and it's kind of neat to have that extra fat. Like, I mean, it's a lot of flavor there.
And at the end of the day, I mean, it's protecting the spinalis, right?
Yeah, it's going to be extra padding on the spinalis, really. I mean, it's going to have that, the extra fat on there for sure. Now, I wouldn't recommend even using that for dry age specifically, because you pull that fat off and then put it back on, you're going to have air pocket within there. But it is just an extra protection on there. So while you're cooking, you're really protecting that spinalis during the cooking process.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that fat really is great for your beef fat potatoes and your Yorkshire pudding when you're serving that with your prime rib.
That's pretty awesome.
I've done that with our, the fat that's left over from that, and that's our Yorkshire pudding.
That's
fat.
a great
It's
idea.
delicious, yeah.
Beef tallow.
pudding.
Yorkshire pudding,
Yorkshire
Brian.
pudding.
You can't have any beef unless you eat your pudding.
But before we put a wrap on this, and I know Nick is one who will talk a lot about it. And it was honestly the nugget of prime rib that made me kind of rethink what I think of prime rib, is the idea of dry aged prime rib and those notes that you can impart. Nick will wax poetically about Smith and Walensky in New York City. They do a lot of their dry aging right on premise, as that is his that's his gold standard for prime rib. But when you dry age, you're getting something extra in there, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, you're getting a lot, so you're condensing that beefy flavor ahead of time, because you're already pulling out some moisture during that dry age process. And then you're getting those different notes, those beefy, blue cheesy type. And so when you're roasting it, it's really bringing all that together, which is amazing. And then if you think about the fat that you already have in there, the marbling, it's all going to be a bigger punch, because since you've lost some of that moisture, your marbling is really going to be the main drive of flavor, and it's going to coat your mouth in just that fantastic way. And to me, that's going to be the beauty of switching over to having a prime rib, dry aged prime rib roast, because you can get that English cut sliced thin, and I think even a thin slice of it is going to pack on a ton of flavor.
Excellent. Well said. Chef, what are your thoughts on au jus?
Au jus?
Yeah.
Au jus? Au jus, au jus, au jus.
I can't wait to see the
I love
choreography
au
with
jus.
it.
Oh my gosh! But before I go into au jus,
Yeah.
one of the things we have really spearheaded to the chefs out in the world is a deconstructed ribeye. Okay, and so one day we were like thinking, what can we do different here with the ribeye? And we just took it apart. Right, we took the spinalis apart, we took the rib off, and we had the fillet of rib left over, and then we created dishes with each separate item there. And just amazing. Serve that with wine or bourbon dinner. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Yes. We take those back ribs too that have been roasting on the prime rib. That is magical, I tell you. If you just cut those and then dip those in a little bit of barbecue sauce and keep roasting those.
Those are fantastic.
Yes, right? But au jus really is the drippings of the prime rib with a little bit of essence of, rosemary and different herbs. And, if you can just do it plain, just au jus, or I've seen people add a little cornstarch or arrowroot to it. Just to give that coating, just to give that extra flavor of, juiciness to that prime rib. But you know what I like to do with my rib? I'll tell you how I like to do my rib.
I want to know.
Okay, I'm going to tell you. So, a lot of folks put it into a very hot oven very quickly, right? Well, I like to season mine with rosemary, salt, and pepper. I love Lawry seasoning. I've used it all the time. And I start at 200. I start at low. Okay, and I let that go to 3 to 4 hours, 20 minutes per pound, 15 to 20 minutes per pound.
Yep.
And then the last 45 minutes, I'll jack the oven up to 500 and get that crust that Brian wants on that fat,
Bless
on
you,
that
Chef.
prime rib. That bless you, right? I mean, that's what you want, that crust.
Yeah.
Let it rest for 1 hour. Always take that temperature. I take it out about 120, 125. I let it rest for 1 hour. Tent it. Right? Tenting. You know what it is. Tenting. I'm not going to mention the city. Okay, Brian? And tent it. And then 1 hour, you have beautiful slices of medium rare prime rib. Bon appetit.
Gosh, that sounds good.
Lord have mercy. Glorious. On that note, it is time to put a bow on National Prime Rib Day, at least as far as this podcast is concerned. I would like to give a big thanks to Nick Solaris and Ryan Wilson, CEO and chef from Lawry's Prime Rib. Also, another nugget that I stumbled upon is another restaurant in the Lawry's family is in Los Angeles called Tam O'Shanter.
Yes.
It's an old-time Scottish steakhouse. Next year, it'll turn 100 years old. I feel like every restaurant, when they make it to 100 years, they should get Willard Scott coming on and saying something about them. I mean, restaurants, especially after this past year, restaurants making it to 100 years, man, awesome.
We should go.
There's a place in San Francisco called the House of Prime Rib.
Yeah.
Really?
And they actually do a lot of dry aging plus regular, but they coat their ribs in salt before they bake them, right? And so that's what gives it the really great flavor, like 10 days packed in
Gets
salt
absorbed
and
in
then roasted.
there?
Yeah,
That's
House of
pretty
Prime Rib,
awesome.
San Francisco.
Nice.
I think we should go to Tam O'Shanter
Completely agree.
do a live show there
Right.
next year.
I'll get a kilt for that.
I mean, I think we need to.
Not shaving my legs, though, I'll tell you that. Not again. On that note, if this is your first time listening to the Meat Speak podcast powered by the Certified Angus Beef brand, please know that you can find us across all of your major podcasting platforms, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other ones that every week I'm like, never heard of that one. Or you can visit us by going to certifiedangusbeef.com/podcast. Until next time, for Chef Tony Biggs, Meat Scientist Diana Clark, I'm Brian Schaff. Tonight, go home and have a delicious slice of prime rib with some cream spinach on the side. And Chef...
Horseradish sauce, Yorkshire pudding, cream spinach.
Right. And you know what? Just for old time's sake, since we are talking like a cut of yesteryear, put on your best duds as well. Dress up for this event.
Exactly.
It's National Prime Rib Day, people.
Pay it homage.
Right. I'm going to jump out of a cow to celebrate National Prime Rib Day. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Meat Speak podcast, powered by the Certified Angus Beef brand.